This UCSD TV program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest programs. The Sam and Rose Stein Institute for Research on Aging is committed to advancing lifelong health and well-being through research, professional training, patient care, and community service. As a nonprofit organization at the University of California San Diego School of Medicine, our research and educational outreach activities are made possible by the generosity of private donors. It is our vision that successful aging will be an achievable goal for everyone. To learn more, please visit our website at aging.ucsd.edu.
Well, thanks so much for coming and for taking the time away from your wonderful San Diego evening to be here tonight, and for trusting that I have something interesting enough to say that it will be worth your braving 5 o'clock traffic to be here. So I will be sharing some work that we've been doing for the past 4 years and that will continue to be able to do for the next 5, as Danielle mentioned, due to the generous support of the American Cancer Society. So without further ado, I will get started. So I will be discussing a few topics tonight, and they're really nested within one another. I'll talk at first simply about care, definitions of care, dignity, and then how the two concepts relate, and specifically how dignity therapy fits into that model. And then I'll share with you some of the research and the next steps that we have emerging forward in these projects. So let's start with care and simply defining care. Care can, on one hand, be a noun. So that can be the provision of what is necessary for health, welfare, maintenance, and protection of someone or something, which I don't know about you, but that sounds somewhat stale, maybe clinical. It sounds as though, well, I'll give you enough as you need in order to take care of you. I would suggest that in this talk, we focus on care as a verb. Care, when used as a verb, is to feel concern or interest, or to attach importance to something. So when I'm referring to care, and particularly care and its relationship to dignity or in healthcare, I'm wanting to focus on when we can start to feel concern and compassion for our patients. I'll start with a quote some of you may have seen. This is an older quote. It's from 1926. This is Francis Peabody's quote from a lecture he gave to graduating Harvard doctors. And he was trying to encourage them to understand the basics of medicine are this: the secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient. Sometimes it's the care, particularly if as a verb, of our patients that makes all the difference. That may not be as convincing when we're talking about healthcare in general, or perhaps abstractly, but I would suggest it starts to become very important when we're talking about the care of our loved ones. When those individuals we care deeply for enter the healthcare system in myriad ways, I think we're all looking for those professionals that can feel concern for them as we do. These are a number of individuals from my family. In the middle is my dear fiance, Mike, my grandmother, and my cousin off to the left as we were headed to Barcelona one year. My mother on the bottom left, my niece Isadora, looking marvelous on her tricycle one winter, and then my grandfather, who's now deceased. So when I think about these individuals, I hope for the best care possible whenever they enter the healthcare system. And I can imagine you can think of people similarly for yourself that you're near and dear to. And for those individuals, we would also hope that when they enter the healthcare system, they're treated with dignity. What do we mean by dignity? If we're looking at simply a textbook definition, it would be the quality or state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed. One author would question whether this is even important at all. This is an article that came out in the British Medical Journal in 2007, and she questioned whether dignity was important at all and considered that maybe it was a useless concept. Partly because she writes that oftentimes dignity is not well defined, and so we don't know when it's been either given or when it's been violated. Other research would show that dignity is important. This is a study that was done by the Commonwealth Fund in 2001, and they were sampling adults in the United States, over 6,000 adults, who had a medical encounter in the last 2 years. And this was a questionnaire that they filled out asking a number of questions about their healthcare experience. And one of the questions was simply, did the doctor treat you with a great deal of respect and dignity? What they found was this, that for patients who had reported being treated with a great deal of respect or dignity during that medical encounter, they were significantly more likely to report patient satisfaction. Not necessarily that earth-shattering. We might assume that people would be more satisfied with care if they were treated with respect and dignity. But then two other points emerged. They found that those patients who were treated with respect or dignity also were more likely to adhere to the treatment provided by that team. They were more willing to follow the instructions, if you will. Also, they were more likely to seek and receive preventative care afterward. If the doctors in that medical encounter had suggested that they subsequently lose weight, stop smoking, gather preventative health care checkups, the patients treated with dignity were more likely to do that. The authors questioned whether it's perhaps were the doctors that were treating them with respect were more likely to offer and suggest those preventative care measures, or perhaps the patients themselves trusted the doctors and trusted their recommendations more because of the way they had been treated. One of the commonplaces that we hear discussions about dignity is in care of the dying. And in fact, I wanted to introduce you to Dr. Harvey Chochinov. He is a distinguished professor of psychiatry at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Canada. And he's the director of the Manitoba Palliative Care Research Unit. He's the co-editor of the Handbook of Psychiatry and Palliative Medicine. And he's engaged in palliative care research for over 20 years, particularly in the areas of dignity and end-of-life care. His research team has found over these 2 decades that a loss of dignity has been one of the most frequently cited reasons physicians offer when asked why their patients at the end of life were requesting hastened death or euthanasia. He also found that nearly 50% of patients at the end of their life would report having a dignity concern or an assault on their dignity. So given the potential link between a loss of dignity and requests for hastened death or euthanasia, this Canadian research team decided that if dignity was worth dying for, it was worth studying and learning more about. It's this group, and Dr. Harvey Chochinov in particular, that created dignity therapy. And there's a book that's actually published on dignity therapy. It's out by the Oxford University Press. If you want to learn more about this particular therapy after I describe it today. But I want to walk you through the components of dignity therapy because this is really one of the first times that dignity in care has started to be defined, quantified, and used in a way that we can tell whether it's been given, in this case, as a psychotherapeutic technique. So dignity therapy is a psychotherapy for palliative care patients. So I want to step back just for a minute. For those of you that may not know the terms palliative care or hospice care, so palliative care is care for individuals with a serious illness. So these individuals have a sense that their life will be shortened, but they'll be grappling with a serious illness at that time when they're receiving palliative care. Hospice care is a form of palliative care, and that hospice care is a treatment given to individuals who are within the last 6 months of their life. So individuals who are on hospice care have a prognosis of 6 months or less. So this is a psychotherapy for patients essentially who are nearing the end of their life. This notably is not a psychotherapy that was created in a different population and then adapted. Dr. Chachanoff and his team created this for this specific group, particularly to address any of their assaults on dignity. This is a brief, individualized psychotherapy, and it's for adults. So what I'll describe to you today is not designed to be for children or individuals under the age of 18. The protocol at this time is not developmentally appropriate for those groups. Dignity therapy is typically performed in 4 sessions over the course of approximately 2 weeks. So it's a rather quick psychotherapy. So the crux of dignity therapy is this, that you will interview people about their lives and find out what's been most important to them, what they're proud of, what lessons they've learned, and what they might wish to pass along to others. And this is all done during a life reflection interview or a life story interview. And I wanted to share the exact questions from that interview with you. Oftentimes when I'm presenting, people want to see what questions are asked of people when they're being interviewed about their life. So the questions are, there are 12 basic questions. Can you tell me about your life history? When did you feel most alive? This becomes a rather pivotal question, and I'll share why momentarily. Other questions are, what are the most important roles you have played in life? What are your most important accomplishments? And the interview becomes more emotionally evocative as we move through it. The latter questions of the interview ask things like, what are your hopes and dreams for your loved ones? What lessons have you learned about life that you would want to pass along to others? And what advice or words of guidance would you wish to pass along? So the interview itself lasts approximately an hour, and it is digitally recorded, audio recorded. That audio recording is then transcribed, word for word. That transcription is later reviewed with the patient so they can go over it with the interviewer and make sure that it's accurate, that it reads the way they want it to read. They can also add information, they can delete information. Sometimes they'll say things like, I shouldn't have said that about my mother. Let me scratch that part of the interview. So it can be both, additions or subtractions. Once all of their edits are completed, an actual book is made. And I brought a sample book with me. So you're welcome, I'll leave it down here in the front. You're welcome to look at it if you'd like. But it is literally, let me turn it right side up. literally ends up being a book like this. So you have, if the person would like, one of their favorite pictures of themselves, their title, the title of their life story, and then you'll see it simply reads just like an interview with them. We'll have the interviewer's questions and their responses. This book, you want to take it? Sure. This book is given to the patient as a gift. They can make as many copies of that book as they would like. For their family, for their friends, they own that book. They can also have the electronic copy because it ends up being a Microsoft Word document. So they can have an electronic copy, and I show you on the screen here what one patient and his family elected to do with his story. Before he passed away, they were working on a memorial website for him, and they uploaded his story onto the website. So you can see the tab at the top that says his life, and a walk through time was his dignity therapy story, or his actual legacy document, if you will. Other families have taken the electronic copy and then inserted family photos, wrapped text around those photos, made keepsake books in that regard. Even sometimes you can go to Costco and get a really nice covered book. You can have your own text, you can have your own pictures, and they create those books themselves. It's a wonderful way for the family and loved ones to get involved and to have something to do, particularly at the end of life when they can feel otherwise more helpless and not available to be able to help their loved one. So we started offering dignity therapy at San Diego Hospice. We started in September 2009. I was one of the first 20 Americans officially trained in dignity therapy with Dr. Chachanoff and his Canadian group. And I'm subsequently, there are only about 75 Americans currently trained in this particular psychotherapy. So it's still new. But I was trained by Dr. Chachanoff and was able to bring that to San Diego Hospice, where it became the first hospice in the United States to offer dignity therapy as a formal clinical service. While we were offering it as a clinical service, I received over 250 referrals for this service, and I completed over 100 patient stories. Because we were the first hospice in the United States to offer dignity therapy as a clinical service, we started to collect data about how it was being implemented, the logistics of that, how much it cost, how much time did it take, and we're able to publish an article related to that. For your own information, I was on average seeing patients for dignity therapy approximately 60 days before their death. So that gives you a sense of time frame. Now it's for palliative care patients, so you might, in other situations, for instance, be offering dignity therapy to, let's say, people with cancer who may have a 3-year prognosis. Just so happens we were offering at San Diego Hospice, and so people were within 60 days at that point of their death, but at least within 6 months. So I don't know about you, but generally if I'm hearing about a concept, I'm hearing about a service, it certainly is much more fun and starts to come alive if I can hear case examples. How does this actually get put into practice for real people, real lives? So I brought in a few different cases, each because they're somewhat different. So I want to share these with you, and I'll tell you why I chose the certain ones that I did. This first case I show because he was a pivotal case for me. This was a man that had been an emergency room physician, so he'd spent many, many years as an ER doc. So you can imagine he had illustrious stories. Individuals who've been in an emergency room for many years have some really interesting stories. And so when I was working with him, I at least had the foresight to realize that he may be a particularly good teaching case, and there may be some great excerpts from his story that I'd like to share in cases such as this, when I'm explaining the work to other individuals. So I proposed this idea to him. I said, would you be willing to be a person that I could share when I'm speaking to audiences or training other students? And being an ER physician, he loved this idea. He'd been training students for years. He was very invested in the dissemination of knowledge and medicine, so he was thrilled with this idea, happy to do it. I said, you know, if I'm sharing your story with an audience, it would be helpful if I had a picture of you, because then you're really going to come to life for them, especially as I'm explaining your story. And he lit up and he said, well, I know exactly which picture I'll give you. And I said, really? And he said, yes, it's going to be the one of me outside the hotel smoking the cigarette. And I said, oh, okay. Because I would think if you pressed me to give you one picture that would epitomize who I am, I'd have to think about it. But he knew right away. So he calls to the caregiver and he says, can you go grab the picture of me outside the hotel smoking the cigarette? And the caregiver says, oh, yes, I'll go get it. So I'm thinking, he knew right away what this picture was. She knows right away what this picture is. This must be some picture. This is the picture he brought back to show me, and I can tell you my jaw dropped. I thought, this is a stunning photo. In my mind, he looks like Humphrey Bogart. And I said, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Well, it turned out that in order to make his way through medical school, he had been a model. And so this was a picture of him from Life magazine, where they'd done a 4-page spread, and this was his favorite picture from that group. He'd also been on 7-Up billboards in Chicago. But why that was pivotal is I realized in that moment that this is the way he sees himself. He does not look in his mind the way he looks as he's sitting across from me, and he's frail, and he's weak, and he needs help to go to the bathroom. In his mind, he looks like this. And I realized in that moment that that's dignity and care. I'm seeing him the way he wants to be seen. And so, since this case, I now ask individuals if they'd like a picture for the front cover. Not everyone takes me up on it, which is fine. And I have no limitations about who's in the picture. The book, it looks like the book is being passed around, great. I included some extra title pages in the back, so you can see that people choose different photos. Sometimes people are in them, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're young, sometimes they're old. I find that interesting. But he really taught me something in that moment, in that day. So I also want to share an excerpt from his story. His title was The Why of Why. And he said this during his story: of the many critical situations I was involved in, one particularly intense one comes to mind. It was the California earthquake of January 1970. I was working at a hospital 2 miles from the epicenter. Approximately 1/4 of the 7-floor building collapsed. The emergency room was spared, and we treated 400 casualties in the following 10 hours. Can you imagine? Later, when asked, what do you do during a catastrophe? I said the answer is the same as for problems encountered in life in general. You don't panic, you put your head down, and you just keep working until the job is finished. I also want to point out in this excerpt that you can tell that the dignity therapy interview is not simply what I'd call a life resume. So I'm not only asking, where were you born, how many siblings did you have, where did you go to college? It's a life reflection. So anytime we're talking about something important in their life, we're also gathering information about what they learned from it. So you can hear the dance that's happening therapeutically in this interaction. He tells me about an event that happened that was meaningful to him, and we talk about, what did you learn from that? How can you pass along wisdom from that event to whomever may read this document? This is a case that I want to share because people have asked if the family can be present for the interview. And the answer is yes, as long as the patient wants that. This is a very patient-centered approach. So if that's what the patient desires, the family can be present. This was a case where the man was the individual on hospice, but he wanted his wife, in this picture, to be present during the interview. So during the interview, we were in his home. He was seated, his wife was on one side, I was on the other side with the audio recorder, so we could interview him about his life. The title of his story was With Love. So the majority of his story was actually about his relationship with her. And he, at one point in the interview, said something so poignant about their relationship together that I've never forgotten it. And I want to share it with you here now. He said, "I want Lisa to know the last part of me to die will be the part which is attached to her." Still have trouble with this one. "My body will go, my mind will go, but the part attached to her will be the last to go." You can imagine how powerful that was in the moment, particularly for him to be able to tell her that while we're having the interview. People have asked me, is everyone happy and in love and everything is rosy in dignity therapy land? No, it's not. In fact, when we qualitatively analyze the stories of our first 27 patients at San Diego Hospice, we found that 90% of them talked about what we termed unfinished business, regrets, things they hadn't done as well as they wished they had. And those regrets ranged from all sorts of topics. But this is a case of a woman who shared a regret that she had. Her title was "What If, Why Not?" And she said this: "My son told me once, I can't think of the words he used, but I noted that he is a better parent than I was, and I just want to reiterate that. I acknowledge that I wasn't always a good parent." This woman was being cared for at our San Diego Hospice inpatient facility, and while there, I met her son, and we had a conversation actually about this very quote, which he said was really important for him to hear. He and his mother had not always gotten along. He hadn't always felt as though she had been the best mother, and so this, he said, meant a lot to him and meant a lot for her to say and acknowledge. I have two more cases left. This individual was a man who was on our service and by all accounts would be termed, how do you say this nicely? A difficult patient. He was cantankerous. He was not the most jolly of patients. And he was very critical of the providers. So for example, whenever a physician would come by to take care of him in the home, he wanted to know where had the physician trained, what university, what degree did they hold, how long had they been in practice, and how did he know that they were actually on the up and up. That was the case whether you were a doctor, a nurse, a home health aide. He wanted to know everyone's credentials. He also, by no means, wanted spiritual counseling. He said, do not bring them in here. I don't want to talk to them. Do not bring me other counselors. I have no interest in that foofy stuff. I just need the doc and the nurse. That's it. Well, somehow the treatment team had brought up the idea of dignity therapy with him, and he wanted to know the credentials of the person who was giving dignity therapy. And he found out that I had a PhD, and he became intrigued. He said, well, we'll see what she can do. And he said, I'll let her come over, but I'm not promising anything. Okay, so now I'm scheduled to arrive at his home, and the first day I arrive, I'm 2 minutes late. So you can imagine the first thing he tells me, you're 2 minutes late. I thought, oh, this is going to go well. So I like this picture of him because this is the way I sort of think of him as I was coming through the door. He didn't look like this, but he had this very pensive, unsure look about him. And as he had said, well, I'll see what she can do. Well, as we got to talking, he started to soften, and I learned more about him. I learned that he'd been married for over 50 years. His wife had just passed away a year earlier on our same hospice service. His wife was the love of his life. And they hadn't had any children, but he considered her to be certainly the best relationship of his life. He also shared the picture with me in the corner of a time when he was in Chicago, and he was a court reporter by training. And he was a very good court reporter, actually. As you can imagine by the way I'm describing him, he was very detailed, and he took his work very seriously. And he was such a successful court reporter that he gained high access security clearance for the government, so he could be on top secret cases and be the court reporter. So I'm learning this about him, and I move to the question in the protocol that you saw that asks, when did you feel most alive? Well, he surprises me by the response, because I'm assuming it's probably something more mechanical. He says, well, I felt most alive when I was writing poetry for my wife. I said, wait a minute, tell me about that. Well, he proceeded to tell me that when he was a court reporter, the machines at that time had paper that thread through. Now they're digital, but they were paper then. So while he was at work and he was at a court case, he couldn't get up if there was a break, so he'd sit, but he'd tear off a piece of paper, and in his spare time, he'd write poems to his wife on the paper, stick it in his pocket, take it home, and when he saw her that night, he'd give her the poem. So I'm really struck by this, and I said, wow, did you keep those poems? He said, yes, she kept all of them. I said, you don't happen to still have those, do you? He said, oh, I certainly do. He said, they're in an envelope right over there. So he asked the caregiver to go grab the envelope. She brings back an envelope that's, not quite 8.5 by 11, completely nondescript envelope, not marked, nothing that would indicate what was inside. So he hands the envelope to me, I open it, and it bursts open with these sheets of paper with his poems on them. And I share this example because this is a time when dignity therapy went a bit outside the box. But I asked him in that moment, I said, would you be willing to have a San Diego Hospice volunteer work with you to compile these poems and put them together in a keepsake book outside of what we're doing for dignity therapy? We'll still work on your story and your legacy document, but outside of that. And he was thrilled. He said, that would be great. He said, especially because so many of the poems need to be finished. And so we were able to connect him with a San Diego Hospice volunteer who had a PhD, who had also had an English background, and worked with him for 4 hours a week to put together and finish those poems. What we did in parallel is we included one of his poems as the last page in his legacy document. So this is literally one of his. And I like it because you can see at the top where he tore it off the machine. And it's in his handwriting, which I think is a wonderful gift to whoever would read it. His title was My Struggle to Be Human. And such an extraordinary man, I won't soon forget him. So the last patient story that I have to share with you is actually a video. So this is going to be live, if you will. But this is a woman that was diagnosed with breast cancer, a progressive form of breast cancer, and they told her that she had approximately 1 year to live. When she heard this news, she decided that she was going to spend as many days or months as she could putting together a garden, because she realized that once she gets ill, she wants to be somewhere beautiful and sacred and peaceful. And so they would create this garden in her backyard in order to do that. I interviewed her in this garden, and this was videotaped with the help of California State University San Marcos. They now have an Institute for Palliative Care with whom I'm partnering that started in September 2012. And they certainly believe in the power of dignity therapy and wanted to capture as best we could a video so that we could share this experience to different audiences. So they helped me videotape this session. I'm going to show you a brief clip of me talking to her about the first time that she met her now second husband and what that was like for her. And then you'll also see that I ask her the question, when did you feel most alive?
Then make your friends who are totally different from the friends that I had had. So it was, wow.
Sounds like it just really expanded
It did.
the whole world at that point.
It did. That was 4 years of, travel almost.
Yes, that makes sense. And is that where you met Ray?
No.
Started to mention that.
Went to seminary, graduated. I was pastoring churches, first one in Tustin, and then up in Newbury Park. And I had been single for 8 years and figured no one's going to marry this. So I got braces because my teeth were crooked, because no one's going to marry this. Who needs a social life? And I had done greatexpectations.com, and it was so gaggy. And so I figured this is just the time to just be. And out of the sky fell Ray. A friend of mine who is a clergy person was his minister, his family's minister.
Okay.
And he introduced us because Ray had recently lost his wife to breast cancer. And so over time, we met, and I call him the man who fell from the sky. And we just fell head over heels. And some of our kids were not surprised. Some of our kids said, "What kind of crack are you smoking?" And that was a journey too. But we've been married almost 12 years now.
Wow. Do you remember what it was like when you first saw Ray?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
What happened?
I thought he was so cute. He was so cute.
Did you have your braces on?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I had braces, and I asked him, because he went in to see his minister. He didn't know anything about me. The minister and I had been plotting, and we called him the Project. So he had a name. He was the Project. So our friend Lloyd, his name is Lloyd. he called me one day and said, our project is going to be in church on Sunday if you want to come. Armenian American man who he was a matchmaker. And so I knew that, and I was thinking about if I had the nerve to go to church that Sunday, because I was on vacation. and so, unbeknownst to me, Ray had gone into Lloyd's office a couple of days later and said, Lloyd, you know, I'm really getting lonely. When would it be appropriate? And Lloyd said to Ray, well, you know, Ray, I know this nice Methodist minister. And I said to Ray, now did your heart just leap? Here you are, newly single, a nice Methodist minister, like with a bun and sensible shoes.
Oh boy, yes.
So, but when I looked at
top
him,
of his list.
top of his list, check out single Methodist ministers. I just thought he was so cute. And I did have a little history on him, so I kind of knew what he looked like ahead of time, but I still, when I saw him, I just went, oh. Oh. So we spent not a whole lot of time together, but enough to realize, as we said, that the outline was complete. There was a lot to learn inside.
Sure.
But that the important stuff we were sure of.
And quite quickly. There
Pretty
was
quickly.
A sense of,
Yeah, within a couple weeks.
so
Yeah,
yes,
in a couple weeks.
quite quickly.
Yeah.
And now 12 years later.
12 years later.
Fantastic story.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So that really helps give me a sense of,
Okay.
of main people in your life and some of the main events that have occurred. So now my next question would be, as you reflect back on your life, when would you say you felt most alive?
I liked that question. Holding my babies. Definitely holding my babies.
Tell me about that. I know, I
Oh.
can see it's right there, right on your heart.
Well, I'm a sensuous person, and the holding of my own babies is the most wonderful thing in the world. I am alive, nothing else exists, time stops still, stands still. And so now, in a similar way, holding my grandbabies, or when they don't want to be held too much, just playing and laughing together and connecting, just that connecting.
You may have noticed on the video, we're still editing that video, so it has the timer running along the bottom. Did you happen to notice about how many minutes that was? It was about 28 minutes into the interview with her, but the section I just showed you was about 5 minutes. So I like to make that point because a number of people in healthcare will say it takes too much time to ask people about their lives. It takes too much time to find out what's important to them. I disagree. It took me 5 minutes to know that about her and what's important about that. So I think the case examples do a wonderful job of showing the heart of dignity therapy, of showing the heart of dignity in care. But I also want to appeal to the science of this. I know you're bright, educated individuals, so I also want to share the research side of this, so you'll know. I show this not because I expect you to be able to read all of it, but just to, in a sense, overwhelm you with an idea that there's a lot of research that's starting to emerge related to dignity therapy. One of the first pivotal articles, primary articles, was published in 2002. That came out in JAMA, or the Journal of the American Medical Association. That really helped launch it as a psychotherapy, but we've seen research since. The highlights of which are one study where 100 patients were treated with dignity therapy, and they were given pre and post measures, so before and after they received dignity therapy. And dignity therapy was found to decrease their depressive symptoms, to decrease their sense of suffering, and to increase their sense of dignity. That led to later studies. The most recent randomized controlled trial, which was funded by the National Institutes of Health, was a 3-site study. So it was conducted by the University of Manitoba in Canada, where Dr. Chachanoff and his group are located. Colleagues of theirs at Curtin University in Perth, Australia, and colleagues at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. Here they had 3 groups in that study. They had dignity therapy patients. They had 136 client-centered care patients, so individuals who were receiving counseling, but it was not focused on legacy or life story. And then 140 patients that were given treatment as usual for palliative care. What they found was that the dignity therapy group outperformed the client-centered care and the treatment as usual in a number of domains. Here are ones that I've highlighted. Treatment being helpful, improving quality of life. One of the most interesting to me is actually this one. Has changed the way my family sees or appreciates me. We then at San Diego Hospice had received a grant from UCSD and the Clinical and Translational Research Institute, or the CTRI, where we wanted to start studying the impact of dignity therapy. And we sampled patients, 23 patients, 7 family members or caregivers who had been part of the experience, and then 18 hospice staff. We asked them some of the same questions that had occurred in the larger randomized controlled trial. And you'll see the results here. So on a scale of 0 to 4, 4 being the highest rating, we asked them, did you feel this treatment was worthwhile? And we received from those individuals high scores across the board. Was it helpful? Yes. What you'll notice, though, even though they felt it would help the family and they would all recommend it in the future, do you notice the reducing the pain and suffering are the lowest ratings? So we were unsure of what this meant. So you're telling me this is a treatment that you find worthwhile, helpful, would recommend, but it doesn't reduce pain or suffering. So what does it do? We then qualitatively interviewed them to get more of the narrative around this. Could they tell me more of the story for how they see this therapy? And one of the San Diego Hospice staff described dignity therapy this way to us to help paint the picture. It's easy to overwhelm hospice patients when we focus on symptoms or final arrangements. But dignity therapy isn't like that. It's a very peaceful place that's not about any of that stuff. It's just about the patient and what they want to say about their life. It lets them refocus on the gifts they can give back, how they can still contribute and be useful. Another staff member told us this: the value is immeasurable. Many personal values are returned to patients with dignity therapy, like self-respect, integrity, family affection, security, and recognition. So this led us to believe that maybe we had stumbled on a psychotherapy that actually had positive outcomes. So not only does this psychotherapy, when given, assist, but maybe it actually improves people's lives for the remainder of the life that they have. And when we thought about it, particularly for hospice care generally has 2 missions. 1, to reduce pain and suffering. 2, to enhance the quality of life. We were starting to see that perhaps dignity therapy enhances the quality of life, and therefore we should be studying those outcomes. We got a good response from the American Cancer Society to do just that. In fact, the American Cancer Society, when you talk to lobbyists and those individuals who have a pulse on what individuals with cancer across the United States want. They say individuals want enhanced quality of life. They want treatments that help them not only feel better, but contribute something to their livelihood. So we submitted to run a 5-year randomized controlled trial of dignity therapy. American Cancer Society has now funded that. It's just begun. It began this July, so we're just a few months in. And you'll see from this schematic that we'll be randomizing hospice patients with a primary diagnosis of cancer into 2 groups. One who will receive dignity therapy, the other who will receive supportive attention. So essentially they will be seen by counselors for an equivalent amount of time as individuals in the dignity therapy group, but those counselors will not be focused on legacy or completing a life story. They'll be offering counseling that's more focused on here and now topics. We're interested to see, based on our hypotheses and aims, whether dignity therapy, because we believe dignity therapy could have the opportunity to increase positive affect, increase contentment, sense of closure, even hope, gratitude, satisfaction with life, and connectedness to family. Those are our primary outcomes, all of which are positive outcomes. So some takeaway messages from this talk. If I really had to distill things down to what I think about care, dignity in care, or dignity therapy, I'd say overall, if you walk away from this lecture realizing that the stories people tell acknowledge their personhood, and when people feel acknowledged in that way, it can reduce depression, decrease their sense of suffering, increase their sense of dignity, potentially change the way their family sees them, and, as we'll find out in our research, may increase positive outcomes. Other people often ask when they leave a talk that I've given, is there any way I can incorporate some of this into my life, into my practice? And I have 3 basic suggestions. 1, regardless of whether you're a dignity therapist or not, you can ask anyone you'd like, when did you feel most alive? Ask your loved ones that. Ask your husband that, your wife that, your partner that. Find out what they'd say. In fact, I would suggest you do it for yourself as well. A lot of us don't necessarily think about, when did I feel most alive? When was I most me? It's a wonderful exercise, wonderful way to get to know someone and acknowledge them. I think you can also ask, particularly, this works well if you're an educator, a teacher. It can be a nice classroom exercise to have students consider the title of their life story. I currently teach a course at California State San Marcos with psychology seniors, and I've used this exercise with them. They've come up with some wonderful, wonderful titles for their story. And lastly, if you're a clinician, the question of what do I need to know about you as a person to give you the best care possible? It's actually called the patient dignity question. This has empirical research behind it already. This is Dr. Chachanoff and the Canada group that's starting to infuse this question into hospitals and finding that when hospital staff ask this question and record the answers for patients, increases their sense of empathy and connectedness to patients. It's also a great way to capture in, let's say, a paragraph summary what's most important about that patient and put it in the chart so that anyone who cares for that patient knows what that patient views as being most important to know about them. So I'll start where I finished. Ultimately, I think the secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient. I think dignity therapy goes a long way to do that. It helps us quantify dignity in a way that the author who thought it was a useless concept may help to, I guess, solidify what we mean when we're talking about dignity and care. How do we deliver it? I'll leave you with a couple of web pages as well. The Dignity and Care webpage is through the University of Manitoba. This is a wonderful site, tremendously resourceful site that has links for clinicians, has links for researchers, has links for anyone who's being impacted by palliative care, perhaps themselves or a loved one. Tremendous resource. And then I've also included a local link, the UCSD Center for Integrative Medicine, who has patient-centeredness at its core and offers a number of tremendous programs to help benefit patients and their quality of life. I'm also working with them on a study to be conducted at the UCSD Hillcrest Hospital, where we will be interviewing patients and asking them what would most increase their care, their comfort, and their sense of relaxation while they're in the hospital, so we can better tune healthcare to their personalized needs. And then if this is of interest to you in any way, whatever brought you here tonight that captured your interest in the title, and if I've managed to maintain that interest and you want to be involved or you want to know more, please feel free to contact me. This is my UCSD email. I'd love to chat with you about it in any way that I can be of help. And I'd like to finish with some important acknowledgments, as I do. First, acknowledge Mike Thomas, my fiance, and an individual who's taught me more about dignity than any other human being on the planet. San Diego Hospice, which this is a picture of the back courtyard of San Diego Hospice, which I still remember fondly. Dr. Meyer, who's in the audience. Jayashri Sundaram, who's been working with me this summer, also in the audience. And other, including Dr. Chachanoff, other fantastic mentors along the way. And of course, the many patients who agreed to share their stories so that you could learn more about this process and willingly gave of their lives and their information so that you could know more about it. So thank you.